Being a professional isn't about the money you make, the position you hold, your level of expertise, or fame. It's the motivation and the attitude you bring to your work. A desire for always learning and improving, and balancing your creative output with getting the business done. Welcome and join the Creating Pros. Hi, and welcome back to Creating Pros. I'm your host, Jim Nettles. So this week I want to talk about something that's been coming up in several projects that we've been working on as of late. And I was working with a writer, and we've been talking about trying to get through a project. And one of the biggest things that we always face, I don't care what the project is, I don't care if it's a book, a painting, a piece of music, some software, there's always the notion of trying to get it to perfection. It's trying to get it done, get it right. And the notion of perfect, I think we all know, is something that's impossible. And so the question becomes, at what point do we know that we've done what would be called good enough? Have we done what we set out to do? Have we done the best that we necessarily can do in a reasonable period of time? And one of the things we look at when we look at given projects is that there is the old saying that perfect is the enemy of good and done. Because even if you're trying to chase perfection, we will never get there. None of us will ever get to perfect. There is no perfect work out there. Everything has things that, at least from the creator's perspective, things that they look at, things that they see, things that they would like to have done differently or better. And often it's a matter of, it's those imperfections through which we learn, we grow, we develop, and we make better product the next time, right? It's the notion of, there's things I've written in the past that when I see them now, I go and I cringe. I look and go, yeah, I really need to go fix that. And sometimes it's bad enough, I will go fix that. That's the reason we have new editions of books. It's not only because things change, things grow, but also sometimes just because things are different. And so this notion of perfection, what is perfection? Perfection is the ideal. It's where we all think we want to aspire to. But the problem is, perfection is also a lie. What it would be perfect in my eye, if I were to get to what I call perfection, undoubtedly someone else will find the flaws in it. If I were to get to perfection, which again is an impossibility, it's a matter of what does that mean to the person for whom it is perfect? Often it is the flaws, it is the failings, it's the things that make a work human that create the greatest value. It's the small misses, it's the things that we look at and say, I should have done this way instead of that way. Well, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be room for improvement. There's room for improvement in every piece of work in existence. I mean, even if we look at the things like the Mona Lisa, things that we would consider classics, there are things there that the artist inevitably would have said, I should have done this a little bit differently. Hopefully the changes, the pieces that we look at that we're missing, or that where we want to make corrections and adjustments, are small. They're the kinds of things that add a little more value here, a little more value there. Things that maybe create a little bit more context, things that bring in a little bit more of something. And often it's something that only we as the creators would see or perceive or remember. Talking about the particular project we were looking at this weekend, and one of the things that we got into a conversation about was, there was something there, and I said, well, what this particular phrase says to me is this. That hints to me that if I read this phrase here, that the character is doing this, that the person is doing this, that tells me all of these things about that person. And the person working on it went and said, well, that's a lot more than I really was thinking about in that particular moment. I'm like, well, these are the kinds of things we have to look at and consider. It's not that we need to change them. It's not that they don't necessarily have meanings that the reader will interpret something to mean. I mean, there's the old saying, sometimes the curtains really are just blue, But there's also the notion that there's all sorts of ideas that subtly will come through the work. We may not be consciously thinking about them. We may not be structuring them down to whatever that nth level of detail is. But even if we're just trying to get something to the state of good and done, then we can start from there to make it better, to improve it. Because especially if you're an author, if you are a filmmaker, whatever the word case may be, if you're an artist, there's always the capability to go back and edit and touch something up and touch it up and touch it up until you hit that point of which we have to go and say it's ready to be introduced to the world. One of the things I love to do, and I don't get as much time to do it as I would like currently, just because schedules and all that kind of good stuff. I love to blow glass. I love to play with hot glass and play with fire. There's nothing like looking at and watching the textures of glass move at a couple of thousand degrees, pulling in pieces here, pieces there, having an intention about what you want something to look like. Well, no matter what, there's always going to be things that we do when we're working with them, manipulating them, managing them, things that may not entirely be in our control, either because we don't have the skill for it yet. Maybe something's a little bit off. We can't control necessarily something as subtle as the weather. How warm is it? How damp is it? How dry is it? All of these things can affect things that you wouldn't think about in terms of playing with glass, especially when you're trying to bring out colors and strike colors. There's a lot of things where color hits a peak because you're in a given temperature range. You don't get it hot enough, the colors won't strike and it'll be dull. If you get it too hot, those colors can burn or they'll shift into something else. Well, with glass, you kind of wind up with what you've got, right? Once the glass is done, it's done. Once you set it, it's annealed, it's set in stone. You're really not going to go back and do a whole lot with it. Unless, of course, you do things like look at it and shatter it, turn it into Fred, things along these lines. But when you're a writer, when you're an artist, when you are even a filmmaker, you've got a lot of ability to go back and make subtle adjustments that make for the better product. And in truth, sometimes the piece of work it doesn't work. It doesn't set up. I've had glass that, you go through, you fire it, it looks perfect. You get it into the annealing kiln, it goes through to heat, set. And when it comes out of the other end and it's cooled, the glass just cracks. There's not a whole lot you can do about it most of the time. Well, if the glass cracks or shatters, sometimes you can fix it. Sometimes you can patch it. Sometimes you can incorporate that into something else. And sometimes you grabbed a glass that just wasn't going to blend with the other glass. You're playing with Moretti and Pyrex and Boro. Those two are just not going to ever mix, and it's never going to set well. And in all of our work, sometimes things just don't work. They don't set well. But we don't know until we've tried. We don't know until they're on the paper. So the most important thing that we can look at as we're working through things in our careers is the value of embracing the imperfections. The value of when something we know in our hearts and our souls is not perfect, whatever that means. But just because it's not perfect doesn't mean that it's not of quality. It's not good. It's not of value. It just may be something that we wanted to do a little differently. We just don't necessarily have quite that right edge of skill to do exactly what we wanted to do. Or we've got the idea, but we just haven't executed on it quite well enough. These things are always going to happen, but sometimes what we're trying to execute on and deal with is something so minute, we're the only people that would ever know it was there. And inevitably, as creators, we always know where those imperfections are. We know where the missed opportunities are. Now, for example, if you're picking up a book, there's always the potential somebody's going to pick up this and go, oh, well, this was a missed opportunity, or I would have done this differently this way. To pick up a piece of glass, to pick up a piece of artwork and be able to look at the colors, the flow, everything through the piece there's going to be people that speaks to, even if there is that imperfection. There's a bubble sitting in the glass somewhere that shouldn't be there, or maybe something is off centered, whatever the case may be. Those subtle imperfections often are what give it the character. This is what makes it a unique piece of work, a unique piece of value. In the world we're in today, and if we look at a lot of what comes and goes in terms of how we're looking at artwork, how we look at creativity, the difference between what is brought to us by an individual creator or a small group of passionate creators versus what comes out of the creative factories, right? Think about TV, streaming, movies, film, a lot of music, even a lot of the stuff that comes out as written work is processed. It is beaten, it's hammered. Often what can happen is we take those essences, those little pieces, the soul out of something because it's become too perfect. And sometimes it's lost that edge of quality. If we look at all the notion of things going on today with artificial intelligence, and working towards, be it generated artwork, be it stuff generated out of Chat GPT. One of the things that all of it has is it may be factually incorrect, but generally these things are structurally going to be good, solid written word. Or if you pull out a piece of artwork, it's getting better and better and better. But one of the things that we do know and we get to see and we get to watch as this artwork, the quality, the errors, the imperfections, as they improve, there's still always going to be those things that the human eye picks up and says, that's not quite right. And in the world we're in today, I often believe it is those subtle imperfections, those things where we could have done better, that create the greatest value, that create that strongest spark in the value of the work we've done, because it's those imperfections in which we show the truth of being human, of being people, of being creators. So learn to embrace and to love the imperfections in the work. Learn to recognize where, yes, there are things we could have and should have sometimes done better, but sometimes it's also that point of saying, we've achieved the level of this is good enough. This has quality. This has value. And this is something that I can stand behind and be proud of. So until next week, this is Creating Pros, and let's go embrace those imperfections.